Greetings all, and welcome to Lucas Brews. In today's video, we're going to be continuing the quest to look at various 1/72nd scale BF109s with the Revell Bf109 G-10. Now, this was a kit I'd kind of been avoiding like the plague. I was a little bit afraid it was going to be like some of Revell's other 72nd scale kits. But someone requested I have a look at it, and I saw it at an air show I went to a few months back and decided to pick it up from their tent. Ironically, they were restoring a Spitfire. However, I figured why not? So today we'll be having a look at it. So I'll start off by having a look at the box before we have a look at the contents. So on the front here, you've just got two BF109s streaking through a formation of B-17s with tracer fire going everywhere and a few bits of smoke and some trails of smoke coming out of that plane there and explosions in the background. And it's obviously drawn by an artist there, so that's quite nice to see. Otherwise, there's not an awful lot to this box. There's pretty much just a repeat on the side here, a few warnings and that sort of thing in English, and then on the back there's just some extra products that Revell is trying to sell. So we've got two pieces of paper. We've got this one, which is like a little kind of warning, instructional kind of thing. Do not drink, eat or smoke while working on products containing solvents. Yeah, you know, all the basic warnings and that sort of thing. And here we've got more warnings. Then we've got a little key, a map of the decals, which you can't really read because it's too small and distorted. And then on the bottom here, you've got your painting guide, which will be in the Revell colours, which we can't really get here in Australia. I'm sure you can probably get them in Europe, maybe in the States as well, but at least in Australia you can't really get them, so that's pretty much going to be useless. But I mean, it's pretty standard for 109s. You can pretty much refer to other instructions or other kits if you need to get those colours. But for the most part, that's not very useful. Opening up here, we've got the decals, oddly. I think they should be on a different page there. Okay, I take that back. It's not a booklet format. It's like two separate sheets of A4 paper that they've printed out. So, yeah. So starting out on the back of the first page here, you've got your sprue map here, which is quite nice and easy to read. So there's two sets of coloured sprue, and then there's the clear set here. Assembly is pretty standard, as you've seen with many of these reviews. You start off with the cockpit, which has a seat and a joystick in this instance, and a little bit of a floor detail. Then you've got a instrument panel, which interestingly is connected via quite large pieces here at the bottom, which I haven't seen in a 109, but it's alright, it doesn't look awful. Then you put your exhausts in and the cockpit before attaching the second fuselage half. Interestingly, the armoured glass is moulded into the fuselage halves on both sides, so that'll be interesting to see how that goes together. And that's it for this sheet. Moving on to the second piece of paper here, you've got the wings here, so it looks like you're adding a little bulge here, which I believe is for the landing gear, and then you're gluing the two wing halves together. Then you attach the elevators and the rudder and then the wings to the fuselage there. Landing gear, which looks pretty simple to assemble. It's just the flap, the strut itself, the wheel, and then you attach that onto the wings. Separate tail wheel here at the back there, so it's not molded into the fuselage, which is handy. It means you can paint that on the sprue later on and not break it, unless, of course, it's a pretty solid tail wheel. Then you've got the drop tank here, a few other little accessories like the late war antenna at the bottom of the wings there, pitot tube, a few other little things like the counterbalances, and a couple of bulges. I believe the late 109s had them for either the engine or the ammunition for the cannon. Unlike the Tamiya aircraft, and more standard for most kits, you don't have a polycap. Instead, you slide the propeller on, and there's a washer that goes on the end of the spinner here, and then you attach the cowling for the propeller hub on over the top of that. And then you attach the canopy, and then some of the smaller details like the antennas there, and the air intake on the side of the engine there. Looks like it's the the two-piece late war canopy, although it only comes as one separate piece, so you can't have it opened, which is a bit of a shame, but otherwise, the instructions appear to be a little bit hard to follow in some areas, like especially this one here. It's a little easy to miss that part and where it goes. But luckily it's a relatively simple aircraft, so it can kind of get away with it. Then on the back here you've got the painting guides for scheme number 1, which is from the Zvezda 7, end of 1945 in northern Germany. So they've got the RLM codes as well as the Revell codes here, so should be able to find an equivalent for each paint brand that you like to use. The other one here is from Zvezda 27, early 1945 Berlin. So you've got one color there that's not RLM, and that would probably be the yellow for the wingtips, but you can always check J with the color code guide here, and you'll find that J is, yeah, it's matte yellow. So, yeah, relatively easy to follow since they've coded the colors a little bit more easily, although still not as good as the colored instructions, and these instructions are pretty basic. So compared to the Tamiya sprues, these ones are really a lot smaller and compact. So you've got two of them in this bag here, plus the clear one, and they're sort of molded in the usual light grey, greenish grey plastic that Revell like to use. So I'll start off by having a look at this one here, which has the fuselage halves, and straight away you'll notice there is a massive amount of flashing on the edges here where the seams would be. That is going to take a lot of work to clean up, so that's kind of the first thing that you notice. Interestingly enough, details are actually recessed, which surprised me when I had a look at this kit, and they're actually not too bad. You can see all of the panel lines here, various access hatches. They've added the kind of raised bulge that would be present on the later warplanes with their better engines, and you can see they've done a little bit of riveting detail there, and for some of the hatches there for accessing the engine cowlings are all molded, so that looks really quite nice. Fair bit of flashing around the exhausts, and again on the front here there's a bit of a nasty seam line, so that's going to take a fair bit to clean up. On the inside here there's actually a little bit of raised detail for the cockpit. You've got your throttle quadrant there and the distinctive trim wheel, but not a huge lot else, and there's a fair few nasty ejector pin marks. Fortunately, they're not in visible spots, and they don't look like they're going to interfere with the actual assembly of the aircraft. Still got guide pins, although they do look a little bit iffy. They're not very cleanly molded at all, so it may not go very well together. Landing gear struts, they look quite thin, but the detail's not too bad on them. Not as much flashing or imperfections on these ones as the fuselage, although there is a fair bit around this sort of joining piece here. Here we've got the spinner hub, and there's a fair bit of flashing and a few little imperfections here and there on it, but there is recessed detailing. It's strangely smooth and shiny actually on this part. And then there's a bit of raised detail, and they've actually drilled out a hole for the cannon barrel there, so that looks pretty nice. Here we've got the wash cap for the propeller. Raised details on the cockpit there. I'll bring the light a bit closer so you can see them a bit more clearly. So there's raised details there, and as you can see, you can paint them up and they'll look alright, although they are a little bit distorted and not very cleanly molded, so it might be a bit tricky to get a good job done on them. Cockpit floor there's some little bit of detail on the side of the floor there, and there's the raised detail there. Rudder pedals are quite basic, and you do still have a little bulge here for the cannon, but it's yeah, very rudimentary details. And on this part there's especially a lot of flashing, and that's going to get in the way of those kind of flash marks there. But no ejector pin marks in bad places on this part here. Landing gear doesn't appear to be as much flash on this part actually as compared to the others. There's a tiny bit of imperfections here and there, but nothing major. No tread pattern, but there is some quite nicely done raised rivet detail on the hub of the wheel, and that's pretty standard. Some of the late war aircraft didn't really have much of a tyre pattern on them. These are sort of some bulges that go on the wings, which I believe are part of the landing gear. If not, then I think they're part of the landing gear on the later G model. They're going to be a bit tricky because they're going to need a fair bit of cleanup before they look good. A lot of flashing, especially on this one here. So that's going to take a bit of work. A few other small accessories for the engine. Again, a lot of flashing, so they're going to be really tricky to clean up there. Tail wheel, they've done a little bit of a raised and recessed detailing for the fabric covering at the top of the strut there, but there's not a heck of a lot of detailing on the actual wheel itself. And there's a few more fine parts here. You can see there's the antennas for the various parts of the aircraft. Joystick here, a little bit of detailing on it. It's not too bad, and the flashing's a little bit worse on this part, but for the most part on the small parts it's alright. And the exhausts here molded pretty close together, not an awful lot of detail, but there's no nasty seam line or any flashing, so they don't look too bad at all. Same story as with the other side of the fuselage for this one. There's a lot of flashing, especially on the armoured headrest, which is one piece, so gonna need a lot of cleanup before it looks alright and can actually fit together. And here we've got the rudder. Interestingly, I think they've chosen to do the late war wooden tail, which was a little bit taller and heavier, but it helps the aircraft with its torque, and it was a bit, I think they're made out of wood largely because the Germans were starting to run out of materials. Taking a look at the second sprue here for the wings, both the upper and lower halves, it's all recessed detailing, although some of the panel lines are really poorly done, especially this one. It's barely visible. You'll have to definitely scribe that one back out, and there's a fair few little imperfections here and there where the molding machine was not very clean at all. No flashing on the wings by the looks of things, except for this quite large chunk here. And there's a fair few imperfections here where the landing gear bay is. A few ejector pin marks inside the wheel wells themselves, but that's probably not a huge thing to worry about. You could probably cover them up or use a little bit of putty. But in general, details, it's alright. It's recessed, which is good, but it's not very cleanly done at all, so that's not so good. Although these might be done on purpose as hinges or something on the ailerons there. Interestingly, the pattern's a little bit stronger on the left, on the right upper wing than it is on the left, so that's, yeah, not ideal, but oh well. There's a few little access ports, and then there's these holes here which you have to drill out for that other piece we were looking at on that other sprue. So yeah, details decent, but they're pretty poorly molded, so it's going to need a fair bit of cleanup. It's the same story on the underside here. They haven't done any rivets or anything, but they have done the recessed panels, and all of the access hatches seem to be in the right spots. Nav lights are alright on the underside, but they don't appear to be very well molded on the upper surface. As for the elevators here, it's a similar story. It's all recessed, but it's not the best. No fabric detailing on any of the controls, which is pretty basic. And here we've got the landing gear covers. There's some raised ribbing on them, so they don't look terrible, but they're not, yeah, on the outside they look pretty basic. I think there would have been some recessed detailing that should be molded into these, but there isn't. It's just a little bit on the inside there. The seat here, a lot of flashing, which is going to take a lot of cleanup. Looks like they have tried to mold some raised seat belts, which you might just barely be able to paint, but I think it's going to be easier to just use some really thin masking tape or something else to counter the seat belts. And here is the air intake, which is molded as one piece, and as you can see, there is no actual air intake at all. And there's a really nasty sink mark on one of the sides of the air intake here, which will have to get puttied up. And you'll probably want to drill out that hole there because it's quite a large and noticeable feature on the front of the aircraft. As for the drop tanks, it's a similar story to the wings. There's recessed details, but it's really badly lost to some of the molding imperfections. And on these ones especially, there's some a little bit of flashing. These ejector pin marks go outside of the frame here, so they're going to have to get sanded down before you can even put the parts together, so fit's not very good on that. And on the bottom here you've got a little Revell copyright for the sprue, which is 1996. And the last sprue that we've got here is the canopy. Now it's a bit tricky to do the late war German canopy because it's a single piece and it's very curved. But the plastic here looks really quite thick, and as you can see, it quite heavily distorts my finger. Even on some of the flatter frames, it's, as soon as I move it away, it gets pretty nasty. Yeah, but at least they've done all the panels, or the frames for the canopy all raised, so it's easy enough to paint, although looking at it, there's a few really small scratches. It's pretty subtle. Maybe you can varnish it out or do something to make it a little bit smoother, but for the most part, yeah, and there's a lot of flashing around the edge there, so they're really not very good clear parts, but I have seen worse. It's all one piece, which I'm not a huge fan of because it means you can't open up the canopy and have a look on the inside, but given the look of the interior, which is better than the Airfix one by a long stretch, but probably not as good as the Academy or Italeri one, at least in terms of how clean the details are, you're probably going to want to keep the canopy closed anyways. There's also the decals here, which don't look too bad at all. If I bring them up nice and close, you can see all of their fine writing is still readable, so it's pretty nicely done in terms of quality, and all the markings look quite good there. You've got your common roundels here, you've got the specific ones for A or B, scheme number 1 or 2, so yeah, you've got the band for their fuselage and their number. Yeah, for the most part looks quite nicely detailed really in terms of decals. Generally the Revell ones are a little bit thicker, but they're not too bad, like definitely better than the Tamiya ones, but not as good as the Airfix decals, so those shouldn't be too bad. Again, it's a little bit hard to tell until you've actually put them on the model, but I don't see any bad yellowing or anything, so yeah, they don't seem to be of bad quality. Nothing enormous to report on them. So this kit, I believe, was, as the copyright on the sprue said, from 1996, and it retails for around about $20. So it's pretty much exactly the same, or at least very comparable to the Academy and the Italeri kits in terms of age and price. And compared to them, there's a few areas on this kit that are slightly better detailed. I think for the most part the cockpit is more accurate. However, it's nowhere near as cleanly molded. There is a lot of flash that needs to get cleaned up. A lot of panels need to be re-scrubbed because there are imperfections and they're not very cleanly molded. And yeah, a lot of detail is lost, sadly, in this kit. But it is nice to see a late version of the 109 that's relatively cheap. So it's pretty much exactly the same, or at least very comparable to the Academy and the Italeri kits in terms of age and price. And compared to them, there's a few areas on this kit that are slightly better detailed. I think for the most part the cockpit is more accurate. However, it's nowhere near as cleanly molded. There is a lot of flash that needs to get cleaned up. A lot of panels need to be re-scrubbed because there are imperfections and they're not very cleanly molded, and yeah, a lot of detail is lost, sadly, in this kit. For some people that won't be at all a compromise, and they'd consider this kit to be pretty near rubbish. I wouldn't call it that, but it's definitely not a great kit. But it is nice to see a late version of the 109 that's relatively cheap. It is kind of unique in having the tail. However, we'll have a look at some other kits which I think are going to blow this one out of the water, but if you're interested in this kit, why not? Give it a go. It's going to need a lot of effort to clean up, and I'm keen to still give it a go and see how it turns out. Thank you very much for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed it and got something out of it. If you did, please be sure to leave a like, and if you have any questions or suggestions, leave them down in the comment section below. A big shout out, as always, to my wonderful patrons for helping me fund buying these model kits and making my animations, and also a little shout out to my local hobby shop, Tectonic Hobbies, where you can buy this kit and many others. Thanks again for watching, and until the next video, as always, model on.